I think it's, let's call it Eskom being opportunistic with the current situation. I think the reality is since probably early 2000s, it's been well known that those 5 coal-fired plants are going to close down. They also have major problems in terms of they're the oldest plants, the most inefficient plants, and the ones that are going to cost the most to meet environmental compliance. Let's say the Minister of Public Enterprises only 2 weeks ago admitted it was the cost to bring all of the coal fleet to compliance was 340 billion. Okay. So I actually think Eskom has just made a rational economic decision to close those coal-fired plants down. The idea that suddenly IPPs are the cause of those truck drivers and those coal miners losing their jobs, I think is somewhat, as I've been economic with the truth. I think the Majuba coal project, which is a Majuba rail project rather, which has been a major infrastructure project that Eskom has been pursuing to rail coal into Majuba power station, which is currently being transported by trucks, is going to take 20 million tonnes of coal off the road. Okay, so to try and now blame IPPs for that, I think I find it somewhat difficult to see the logic behind that. The issue around coal mines, yes, those are going to be affected going forward, but I think it's already anticipated in the IRP plan. Okay, so it's not something that is, whether it's us, whether it's nuclear, okay, whether it's gas, okay, I find it odd that suddenly renewable IPPs are being targeted as the reason why these things are happening. In fact, we don't choose the technology mix for the IRP. That's actually done by the DOE itself. Look, I think there are two main scenarios that we have seen evolve over the last few months. We have seen let's call it preferred IRP base case mix that DOE, I think, put out in end of November, which contained 20,000 megawatts of nuclear. There is a least cost unconstrained scenario, which was something that MACE had asked the DOE to produce, okay, which showed an energy future that contained lots of renewables, lots of gas, a little bit of coal, and no nuclear. Okay. Now, that scenario is the cheapest, let's say, route for South Africa to provide its energy needs till 2050. Okay, so our issue, now in that, you either have a large amount of nuclear, you have a large amount of renewables and gas. Typically under the unconstrained scenario, that gas and that renewables will be built by IPPs and not by Eskom. And in that scenario, if Eskom were not to build any renewables, we would end up in a situation by 2050 where Eskom would essentially only own between around 6 to 8% of the generation fleet. Under the preferred scenario, they own 70% of that fleet. So yes, there's been an argument set up that it's between renewables and nuclear, but I don't think it's actually that. I think the critical issue is to look at what the actual cost difference between the least cost scenario and the nuclear scenario, let's call it the nuclear scenario, let's call it for now, looks like. And that, by its own calculation, or by CSR's calculations, come out at an additional 86 billion per year from about 2040. Now, so actually it's not a nuclear versus renewables debate. It's a nuclear versus almost everything else debate. It's a nuclear versus, do we need more housing? Do we need more primary education? Do we need a national health insurance system? Okay, so those are the debates that need to actually happen. Okay, and I think that's why I think, to be fair, why us and many other stakeholders have said we want to see that least cost unconstrained scenario as the base case. Because from there, you can choose any other scenario. We can choose that we want to have 100,000 megawatts of gas. Okay, we want to completely develop potentially the fracked gas in the Karoo. Okay, but then we must compare the tariff path. And we can say, is it affordable? Okay, and I think the other part is, are there better things we could do with that money? We are in a constrained fiscal environment. Okay, the Minister of Finance in his ex-Minister of Finance, sorry, in his medium-term budget statement said over the next 2 years we must raise 50 billion through taxes and through cutting down the size of the public sector. Okay, so it's not we can afford, be careful to say this, but vanity projects. Okay, so these are the debates that need to be had. Okay, unfortunately, if we choose a base case that is already, let's call it, has been policy adjusted, it doesn't allow that debate to take place. Okay, so you use intermittent, I think we'd use variable. Okay, I think you'd find we've now had in South Africa 4 years of wind and solar projects. Okay, and we have seen the data, and actually what you start to see is actually more predictable than you think, and certainly more predictable than the Eskom system operator thought. And they are now happy that they can manage it currently within the current system. But we have, I think, renewables probably at 3-4% right now. I'm not sure of the numbers. Penetration, our energy mix. If we go to other countries in the world, okay, where we have 50-60% penetration, okay, and those system operators are managing those systems without any problems. Okay, we've just literally done a study which for Eskom and DOE that specifically looks at that, funded by the German government. That will be public in the next kind of, I think, 5 or 6 weeks. I think, so the evidence is there. I think we just have to look. We remember, South Africa is not a lead, is not a leader in this sector. We're not even a follower. I think we're probably a second follower. So there are lots of lessons that we can learn and avoid to pay the school fees that places like Germany have paid, that California has paid. Okay, and it's important that we learn those lessons. I think the response has been probably, to make it very simple, I think it's one, that we believe the unconstrained lease cost base or scenario of the IRP should be the base case. I think secondly, that we use realistic pricing on technologies. I think we now have, I think, 4 rounds of prices that have actually been contracted in South Africa. So we have a very clear idea of what the price is. So when you look at the IRP using, I think, just above 90 cents for wind and solar, okay, and we have prices 10 cents below that, anticipated to be 30% cheaper, okay, in the expedited round, then I think it's fallacious if we don't use correct pricing. In the same way we're using 97 cent LCOE for nuclear, based on a hybrid price that no one can replicate independently, okay? Based on supposedly Asian pricing. Now, the whole point of this process is that an independent analyst should be able to take the model and should be able to replicate. Now, for us, what we just want to see is that they use accurate relative pricing, okay, when we deal with that. And I think probably the other part is a need to actually see the tariff implications of these different scenarios. Absolutely fine that we look at different scenarios. There's nothing to say that the unconstrained least cost base case must be, you know, the one we use. But if we deviate from that, let's understand what the cost implication is. What is the dividend or benefit of that? If someone was to say to me, yes, we're going to go this route, but we're going to create so many different jobs in industry that would be worth paying an extra 50 billion a year, then that's fine. Then everyone can make that in an informed fashion. At the moment, we are unable to have a debate in an informed fashion.